Well, speaking of the Bible provides a very clear and timeless promise in Genesis chapter 12, and with the covenant to Abraham that was made in Shechem. It was there just about a month ago. And he says, the Lord said, I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you, I will curse. Well, the United States has long stood as an ally to Israel and reaped the rewards of God's blessings. And I believe the blessings that we have had in large part are due in the last 76 years to the fact that we have stood resolutely with Israel. Now, in recent weeks, we've seen the Biden administration kneecap Israel's efforts to defeat Hamas. That coincides with a rash of natural disasters throughout the United States. Now, this is not the first time. We've seen this going all the way back to when in 2004, I've talked about this on the program, I was in some of the meetings, where the Bush administration was working then to encourage Israel to pull out of what is now Gaza, which we're now, this war is being fought over. There used to be Jews in there. The IDF used to provide the security until there was the disengagement in 2004, and then 2007, Hamas was elected as the government. Well, joining me now to discuss this in terms of the connection between our foreign policy with Israel and natural disasters here in the United States is former White House correspondent Bill Koenig. He's the director of the Koenig World Watch Daily. He's also the author of Eye to Eye, Facing the Consequences of Dividing Israel. Bill, welcome to Washington Watch.
Great to be with you, Tony.
You know, as I was watching these storms over the last few weeks, I thought, there's got to be a connection after reading, your book back that was updated in 2017, Eye to Eye. There's too many parallels, too many connections to be coincidence. Share with what you've recently seen in terms of the connection between what the United States has done regarding Israel and what's been happening here in terms of natural disasters.
Well, thank you, Tony. The main thing is the premise of Eye to Eye is when we American presidents apply pressure on Israel to divide their covenant land, or in other words, to create an Arab state in Judea and Samaria, we have massive record-setting events, corresponding events. It's usually within the same day or within 24 hours. And I've noticed from over 20 years of documenting this, the greater the pressure on Israel to divide their land, the greater the corresponding catastrophe. We have 40 record hurricanes in the U.S., all connected to what we were doing with Israel at the time of the hurricane. 3 of the 4 largest tornado outbreaks also have a connection to what we were doing with Israel at the same time. And also 9/11. 17 days from 9/11, President George W. Bush was working on dividing the covenant land of Israel. And we had these enormous catastrophic events. And that's what we're experiencing right now, Tony.
All right, so let's connect what we've, well, I'm gonna go back. Hurricane Katrina, at the time, one of the most costly that America had experienced. It was during the Bush administration. Was that connected to anything?
Absolutely. President Bush and Ariel Sharon had worked on the disengagement plan. This was in late August 2005. And the purpose of the plan was to move 9,500 Jews out of southern Gaza into other parts of Israel. This is the disengagement plan. Right after the forced eviction of 9,500 Jews from their homes, their synagogues, their businesses, President Bush called Sharon and congratulated him for this very significant and what he called a courageous move. Within a couple hours, a tropical depression formed between the Bahamas and Miami. And within 24 hours, it was Tropical Storm Katrina, 48 hours, Hurricane Katrina, and it's been the largest disaster in U.S. history. The parallels of what happened in Israel that 7 days is incredible and very significant because the parallels, we had Americans dislocated to 32 states around the country. We had Israelis dislocated throughout Israel, and on and on. So absolutely.
All right, some say, well, coincidence. It just happened. Bring us forward to even what we've just experienced in the last few months.
Well, especially April. April was the second largest month of tornadoes in U.S. history. There was 300 tornadoes, most of them at the end of April, when Joe Biden was forcing or putting pressure on Israel to cease fire. Secretary of State Blinken was in and out of Israel. They were talking about stopping of weapon transfer and putting a tremendous amount of pressure on the Netanyahu government not to go into Rafah. And what's interesting, Tony, is the last time, or the record-setting April hurricanes, that was 757 in 2011, when U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Susan Rice, and Hillary Clinton and the White House were calling specifically the settlement communities in Israel illegitimate. And that became the mantra for the Obama administration.
Now, just recently, we also had floods in Houston, significant floods, not just normal floods, but I mean quite unusual floods. That connected to one of these actions?
Absolutely. May 1st and May 2nd, Secretary of State Blinken was in Israel, meeting with the Israelis, meeting with Middle East leaders, in Saudi Arabia, talking about the possibility of normalization agreements, but primarily, or normalization agreement between Israel and the Saudis, but primarily extending significant pressure, along with what Joe Biden was doing from Washington and in the press. Right at that time, a massive rain producer fell on Houston. It's very significant, one of the largest floods in the history of Houston. The last time there was a significant flood in Houston was in August of 2017, when Jared Kushner was traveling around the Middle East trying to get Middle East leaders to support his two-state plan. He was in Saudi Arabia, Doha, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, Jordan, Egypt, met with the Palestinians and met with the Israelis, and a remnant of a storm developed into Hurricane Harvey, which is the second costliest flood in U.S. history.
So God is not a respecter of political parties. It's anyone who seeks to divide that land, that covenant land which he gave to the Jewish people. It would, I mean, the record suggests there are consequences.
Absolutely. You can feel the collective, or even sense it in the spirit, the collective fury or the wrath of the God of Israel when they talk, first of all, pressure Israel to divide their covenant land that God gave them according to Genesis 15:18, from the Euphrates River through 4 or 5 Arab countries today and into Egypt. You can see it. And that's what I mentioned earlier, Tony. The greater the pressure on Israel to cooperate and to pressure them, the greater the corresponding catastrophe in the United States. Because most of these events have happened here because we've been the point man in the peace process. But at times, the French, the British, and the Germans have been very involved, and even during our U.S. elections took a more direct role, and the same thing happened to them in Germany, in France, and Britain, as I mentioned. So whoever attempts to touch or divide or create new boundaries suffers the consequences.
Well, the backdrop to what's happening right now as the administration is kind of tying the hands of Israel as they seek to eliminate the threat of Hamas, quietly working in the background is the push for the two-state solution. We've heard that from the Biden administration. They're working on that to advance that. And just from a political standpoint, that makes absolutely no sense. Why would you reward the terrorist of Hamas and what happened there, and the brutality and what they did on October the 7th, with giving them a two-state, or giving them their own state, which is what Biden is suggesting? I would think that doing it in this context, dividing the land, would lead to even worse consequences for us as a nation.
No doubt about it, Tony. And I think I need to go back to September 22nd of last year. The Biden administration was applying tremendous pressure on Israel and the Saudis and Netanyahu, and the Saudis were talking about normalization agreement. And on 9/22 at the UN, Netanyahu gave his speech, and he talked about a new time of peace for Israel in the Middle East. He even had a graphic that showed the new Middle East. He talked about Arabs and Jews getting along. He talked about hope for a future. He alluded to a Palestinian state and talked about the importance of normalized relations with the Saudis. At the same time, Crown Prince bin Salman was on national TV in America doing interviews talking about this moment of peace between Israel and the Saudis, and was very optimistic as well. 15 days later, Netanyahu went from the Middle East peacemaker to the Middle East leader that was at war, being chastised for the fact that Israel was not prepared. And I'm a big supporter of Netanyahu. I think he's been a fantastic prime minister, and he's definitely the man for the hour to deal with the Iranian threat. But he went from a man of peace to a man of having to deal with the situation where over 1,200 Jews were slaughtered in their homes and various other places, bases according, and other places. And then, and also having to defend Israel's actions over the last 7 months to the international community. So in many ways, he is the guy that they're looking to get things back in order. But Netanyahu's committed. He says, we have to eliminate the Hamas problem. And he's committed to that despite the pressure from the White House. But what's interesting, Tony, in some of the recent articles, is Joe Biden's political approval and his handling of this is affecting his campaign. And many people in the secular leftist media of America are saying the outcome of this could very well affect Biden's attempt at reelection in November.
Do you think it affected Donald Trump's reelection in 2020 as Jared Kushner was pushing for that two-state solution then?
Absolutely. And when I speak to audiences, I say there was no better friend of Israel than President Trump. He did more for Israel than all American presidents combined. But he came forward with the Trump-Kushner plan in January of 2020. And I wrote a commentary, Life in America before January 28, 2020, and life after. There is no doubt that the consequences right after that, Peter Navarro was warning the White House, we have a serious COVID problem the same day of the introduction of the plan. And then throughout the summer of the efforts toward the Abraham Accord, every time Kushner was pushing hard on the Abraham Accord, we had massive record-setting hurricanes. We've had a Hurricane Laura, that disrupted the Republican convention of 2020. And on September 15th, at the signing ceremony,
right,
with Emirates, Bahrain, Netanyahu in the U.S., Hurricane Sally was about to hit the southern Gulf Coast. And the Hebrew derivative of Sally is Sarah. So in other words, Hurricane Sarah was about to hit the southern Gulf Coast right after the signing of the Abraham Accord of September 15, 2020.
Well, Bill, my takeaway is we've got to get leaders who will support Israel and stand solidly with them, or I'm going to have to move out of Louisiana because we keep getting all these hurricanes down there.
That was
Bill,
a tough summer. Yeah.
Fascinating, Bill, and you've got me convinced. When you look at the record, there's no other explanation, and it is in line with Scripture as well. Bill Koenig, I want to thank you for joining us. Always great to talk with you, my friend.
Thank you, Tony. Always a pleasure to be with you. God bless you.